Llew O'Brien back in the party room. This is being noted as a possible sort of source of tension. He's making his mark already as well. He wants to tear up the Paris Agreement or have Australia exit it because of COVID impacts on our economy. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do, Tom. I've been saying similar things for the last couple of months. I think our priority must be to, well, one, rebuild the Australian economy after COVID, but perhaps more importantly for the long term, to rebuild our manufacturing sector. This is the first time on record in the last decade that our manufacturing industry has gone backwards. And if that continues, we'll be in a very weakened state if the tensions we're seeing in our region continue to increase. So I just don't think you can serve two masters. And while ever we're so focused on reducing carbon emissions, as we have been in the last 10 years, it shows that you then lose other things. You give up other things. You can't have everything in life. Some people down here often try and hoodwink people to say you can, but life is about making choices. And I think our priority choice right now should be get back to making things in this country, using our natural resources and ensuring that we have the strength to defend our own country and independence for the long term.
The plan at the moment for our Paris commitment is 26 to 28% emissions reduction by 2030. There's no more money the Australian government needs to spend on that, according to all the estimates we have. So what's the benefit? How would tearing up that agreement or Australia pulling out specifically help manufacturing?
Yeah. I'll give you some practical examples, Tom. It's all about growth. The problem we've got now is that we cap our growth. We cap our potential as a country because we're saying we've met these things, and if we want to get back to making things rather than importing things, you'd have to buy credits or offset the carbon emissions some other way. So take, for example, some agricultural developments I know in North Queensland. They have to, or been asked to, offset any reduction in trees, because one of the main reason we've met our Kyoto targets is because we've stopped farmers from clearing land, and therefore that puts an extra cost and burden on that agricultural development occurring. So we have a priority at the moment that we want to double agriculture by 2030. I have no confidence that we'll meet that target if we continue to have these ridiculous costs imposed on our farmers, and costs that aren't imposed on farmers from overseas. And there's no restrictions on people importing food from overseas. There's no restrictions on people importing steel or aluminium or any other product from overseas. So what happens, of course, is we put these ties on our own economy, which stops us producing things. But we don't stop consuming things. People still want to buy cars and build homes and eat food. And so we just import more, which is what we've been doing for the last decade. And I think that's a mistake because I think it weakens ourselves as a country, and it doesn't help the environment to boot.
I mean, even putting aside various debates around what things will cost and obviously the cost of renewables and so on, there would be a cost if we just pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. There is every chance we would pay at the trade table, that we would be seen as a laggard, and there would be penalties placed upon Australia. Doesn't that need to be factored in as well?
Well, almost every other country in the world would be in that bucket, Tom. New Zealand isn't meeting its Kyoto targets. Canada isn't meeting its Kyoto targets. Japan isn't meeting its Kyoto commitments. A few countries in Europe are, some aren't though. The US is, only because of fracking. Hardly any other country is meeting its Kyoto targets. So what?
We're talking about Paris.
I mean, we'd all be in the same boat. We'd all be in the same boat.
We're talking about countries that are still trying to meet it, and Australia going, we're out.
No. Hang on. Kyoto comes due this year, Tom. It's too late. They've got 3 weeks. New Zealand has 3 weeks to cut its emissions by another 2%. It's not going to happen. Canada, in a worse boat, Canada's only reduced its emissions by 1 or 2%.
So there's a difference between missing it by a couple of percent and then saying, here's our next target, here's what we're going to do, here's how we spend money to make it happen.
Tom, they haven't missed it by a couple of percent. New Zealand's was a 5% target. So they've missed it by almost 50%. They've only reduced their emissions by 3%.
Percentage points.
They wanted to reduce it by 5%. So 2 percentage points, but 50%. A 50% out.
I understand that, and these other countries don't have a perfect record, but there's also a difference between saying, if Australia in that situation says, well, hang on, these countries missed it in 2020, so everything's fine. It's also what's happening in the future. That's what countries are going to be more focused on. There would clearly be a strong chance. Yeah. Let me just put this to you. There'd have to be a strong chance there'd be ramifications for Australia if we just said, we're out of Paris. there'd be a good chance there'd be ramifications for us.
Well, let me put this to you. It's the oldest trick in the book, right? When someone doesn't meet a target today, they promise something usually even more adventurous in the future and then say, look at that. And that's what these other countries are doing. So there'd be no justification at all for any action against Australia, and there never has been any action against any country that's decided to go its own way or not meet its own commitments.
It's a question of
one thing is
I want to move on to a few things. So sorry to jump in there. The PM is going to ditch Kyoto carryover. Again, the estimates we have is we won't need this. If this gives us some credit in the bank, if you like, and it means Australia doesn't increase its emissions ambitions, its reduction ambitions, would this be a good move?
Well, the first point I'd make is I don't know why we'd give this up before getting something out from other countries, because I don't think by giving this up, other countries are increasing or doing anything about their lack of commitment.
A lot of countries are making new commitments at the next meeting, so that's the context of it.
I don't think we should be giving up Kyoto credits until other countries agree to have Kyoto debits, because there, as I said before, other countries are behind on their Kyoto commitments, so why shouldn't they be made to catch up further in the next round by 2030 and have them added? If we've got to give up what we've overachieved, other countries shortly have to catch up on what they've underachieved, I would have thought. That's number one. Number two, if we do have overhang credits and we still want to play this game that does nothing for the environment but makes us all sleep at night, or some of us sleep at night, well, let's use those credits to help our farmers. Because as I said before, Tom, the only reason we are meeting our Kyoto targets is because state governments have stopped farmers developing their own land. There was no compensation offered to farmers. They had a reduction in their property values because of it, because they had all these parts of their land that previously they might have been thinking of developing in the future, which was suddenly locked up. And we were able to credit those to being able to save the planet. It was a silly sort of rule, but we were able to use that rule to say that we've cut our carbon emissions. I mean, I feel for New Zealand and Canada and other countries, our emissions, not including land clearing, are about the same as their profile. It's only because we've had this so-called Australia clause in the Kyoto Agreement we got it. So why don't we use those credits to help our farmers? Why don't we do that? Why don't we help Australians first, rather than play this international game where we seem to want to go in there saying sorry all the time, when we should be sticking up for our own country and our own development?
Land clearing laws and the way it was actually included in the original Kyoto was a huge part of why Australia did get to our targets, but others would say it's more to do with how that's counted rather than a major sacrifice and what happened in the years before. I want to get on, though, just a couple of other things. So the tension, I suppose, within your party, would you ever serve in the cabinet under Michael McCormack?
Oh, I've got no interest in going back to the cabinet, Tom. I love what I'm doing right now.
Is that full stop or under Michael McCormack?
Well, I'm just not focused on that right now. And look, I still have my issues with it.
Does that mean not under Michael McCormack?
Well, if you let me finish the question, I expressed issues with the leadership and direction of the party this year. Those issues remain. It's not about the leadership for me, it's about the outcomes. I want to see progress on things like a coal-fired power station in this country, because I think we should get back to making things, not just letting other countries use our resources. I want to see us take those restrictions off farmers so they can develop their land. And, those things haven't happened in the last year. So I still obviously remain frustrated about those policies, and I'm focusing myself on trying to do what I can to get what I view better policies and laws for the people I represent, especially in regional Queensland. So that's my focus, and it's good to have Llew back in the party room.
So just on the test that you sort of set up there for Michael McCormack, getting coal-fired power, a new coal-fired power station, states don't want one. He can't just make that happen, can he?
Yeah, well, states didn't want the Snowy Hydro system either, Tom. If you go back and read the original bill that went in under the Chifley government, they explicitly used the defence powers of the Commonwealth because state governments were opposed to the Snowy Hydro, or the New South Wales Victorian governments at the time were opposed to the Snowy Hydro scheme, and they showed, but they showed leadership and they got it done, and now we have one of the greatest power generating assets in the world here in Australia thanks to that leadership.
But what would Michael McCormack really do
sure, there's opposition
to actually get coal-fired power up in, say, New South Wales or Queensland? I mean, how does he just go in and override what the state government wants?
Well, clearly we can. We've done it before and we can do it again. Let's do that. Let's do it because, last fortnight, we saw the spectacle of the New South Wales government unilaterally ripping up, effectively, the energy deal between ourselves and the New South Wales government. They provided no consultation on their radical legislation to force feed more renewables on the backs of energy customers in New South Wales. It has already led to the undermining of the Commonwealth Government's underwriting new generation investment schemes, with people walking away from gas and coal projects which were to be supported under that scheme. So we should drop the pretense of any kind of cooperation here. We're not cooperating with the state governments, clearly, even the New South Wales government. And so I think we need to do what's in the interests of Australians to protect this country, and that's to get back to making things as I've been saying.
Just finally, very briefly, I mean, you mentioned you had concern about the direction under Michael McCormack. Does he have your support as leader at the moment?
Yeah, of course he does, because the party room has made that decision. And as I said, I'm focused on those policies. It's good to have Llew O'Brien back in the room, because it's always good to have an extra number in your party room. Politics is always about numbers. So, I'm sure all my colleagues will welcome having that extra number in our room. That strengthens our position, our ability to deliver on the things that are important for regional Australians, and that's what I'm focused on doing, Tom.
The Nationals' position, it doesn't strengthen a potential challenger's position to Michael McCormack as well?
Well, no, as Lou said, he's ruled that sort of hijinks out. I know he's focused on these sort of policy matters that I've raised with you today, that he's already out there doing, and I think he'll have more impact being in a room of many rather than just on his own.